welcome back to another Explainer. Today, we're investigating a massive, high-velocity impact event, the rapid evolution of heavy metal music. Have you ever listened to a genre and wondered, where did this exact sound actually start? We kind of tend to assume music evolves smoothly, right? Like one band naturally passing the baton to the next in a nice, neat little line. But honestly, the truth is so much more explosive, messy, and mysterious than that. Today, we're going to treat music history like a literal forensic crime scene. We want to understand how genres are really born, pulling apart the timeline to find the exact spark that ignited a global phenomenon.
To set this up, let's dive into this brilliant quote by sociologist Dina Weinstein. Genres begin before they are named. It's absolutely crucial to remember this. Long before anyone coined a term like heavy metal or thrash or death metal, the musical practices that define those genres were already happening in the shadows. The music is alive, It's breathing, it's rapidly mutating in these cramped rehearsal rooms and sweaty underground clubs way before journalists or record labels ever get the chance to slap a convenient marketing label on the whole shebang.
So how do you trace a genre in reverse? That brings us to the core challenge of our explainer today. If genres begin before they even have a name, how do we work backwards? Think about it. When a massive cultural shift hits, like the eruption of heavy metal, we only see the impact. We see the crater it leaves in pop culture, right? The sold-out stadiums, the millions of records sold. So, to figure out exactly who pulled the trigger and why, we have to work backward from the very edge of that crater, carefully sifting through the debris of music history. To solve this, we're turning to the fascinating work of Dr. Andy R. Brown at Bath Spa University and his research on tracing metal trajectories. He proposes this brilliant central metaphor. We have to treat genre evolution exactly like a forensic crime scene. Basically, he argues that analyzing music history is essentially searching for a smoking gun. But here's the catch. You can never actually be there to see the trigger being pulled. The event has already happened. So you have to reconstruct the scene retrospectively, using only the sonic clues and historical fragments left behind by the musicians themselves. Dr. Brown points out that the musical battlefield of the late 1960s was incredibly thick with noise, smoke, and competing sounds. Psychedelia, blues, and early rock were all just colliding at once. To find our smoking gun in all that chaos, we can't just look at everything simultaneously. We have to pick a tracer. A tracer is a bullet or shell whose course is made visible by a trail of flames or smoke. In our forensic investigation, we're going to choose one highly visible, high-velocity band that lit up the scene and follow their fiery trajectory backward through the noise. Tracing the Tracer, the brief, high-velocity saga of rock's first supergroup, Cream. For our real-world case study, we're tracking a truly explosive tracer. Featuring the virtuoso talents of Eric Clapton on guitar, Jack Bruce on bass, and Ginger Baker on drums, Cream took the traditional acoustic blues that Clapton deeply loved and completely mutated it. They plugged in, turned those amplifiers all the way up, and added high-volume jamming, extended improvised solos, and Bruce's jazz and avant-garde sensibilities, all of it driven by Baker's famously manic drumming. They were loud, they were overpowering, and they brought a completely new heavy blues sound to an entire generation of white rockers who were literally watching their every single move. July 1966, Cream forms. January 1967, Fresh Cream is released. December 1967, Disraeli Gears is released. And by November 1968, they play their final concerts. This timeline brilliantly illustrates the sheer velocity we're talking about here. Just look at how fast this happens. In just over 2 years, a remarkably short window, this band formed, completely redefined the instrumentalist role in rock music, released paradigm-shifting albums like Fresh Cream, sold 15 million records, earned the first certified platinum double album in history, and then completely burned out due to massive ego clashes and rampant drug abuse. It was a blazing fast trajectory that changed music forever. 5. That massive number 5 represents the mere 5 days it took Cream to record their psychedelic masterpiece, Disraeli Gears, in May of 1967. They were in New York at Atlantic Studios, and the pressure was just immense. They had to work incredibly fast, with many of these legendary, super complex tracks nailed in just 1 or 2 takes. The record label desperately wanted Eric Clapton to be the primary frontman, but get this. It was bassist Jack Bruce who showed up to the sessions with 20 fully written songs, while Clapton only had 2. It was a chaotic, high-pressure cooker of competing artistic visions that yielded absolute rock history in less than a week. Disraeli Gears, a tragic bursting heart and a roadie's mispronunciation. The chaos definitely didn't stop at the music. It even extended to the album's title. Disraeli Gears sounds deeply profound and perhaps slightly psychedelic, right? Well, actually, scratch that. It comes from a deeply bizarre, tragicomic anecdote. The band was talking about a Scottish cyclist named Tommy Simpson, who had just made history in the Tour de France, but tragically died when his heart literally burst on a hill while he was using speed. They were discussing the common derailleur gears on his racing bike, and a roadie mistakenly mispronounced them as Disraeli gears. The band found the slip-up amusing enough in the moment to just slap it on the cover of what would become one of the most famous rock albums of the 1960s.
Tracing the smoking gun, the Church of Metal, or the Old Testament of Heaviosity. Okay, so we've seen how fast and messy a real band's history is on the ground. But how do academics step back and make sense of this chaos to strictly define a genre like heavy metal? Dr. Brown playfully categorizes the first major academic theory as the Church of Metal, which is heavily grounded in the ideology and subcultural values of rock. Dina Weinstein's crystallization theory maps out a very strict timeline. 1969 to 1972 is the eruption of heavy metal. 1973 to 1975 is the crystallization phase. 1976 to 1979 is the golden age. And 1983 onward is the fragmentation into subgenres. This Old Testament relies heavily on the idea of shared subcultural values. Specifically, she argues that the absolute core of metal is defined by a fierce rebellion against commercialism. According to this model, whenever the music gets a little too popular or too commercial, a new, purist wave, like the new wave of British heavy metal, has to rise up from the underground to reaffirm those pure core values and essentially save the genre from selling out.
Theory 2, the New Testament of rhythm and cultural reading. Now, not everyone buys into the strict ideological approach of the Old Testament. This brings us to a second framework, championed by popular musicologists like Andrew Cope. This theory strips away the cultural posturing, the leather jackets and the rebellious attitudes, and focuses purely on the music itself. It asks structural questions. How do the musicians physically play the guitars, the bass, and the drums? Where is the shared musical syntax that makes a song undeniably heavy metal? Led Zeppelin retained blues and rock and roll stylizations versus Black Sabbath's radical transgressions of blues context and origins. The crucial point here is how Cope finds the genre's true fingerprint. He does this by directly comparing two massive pillars of heavy music. According to Cope, while Led Zeppelin was undeniably heavy, they faithfully retained traditional blues and rock and roll stylizations in their song structures. Black Sabbath, on the other hand, committed radical transgressions against their blues origins. By entirely dropping traditional blues stylings and utilizing aggressive down-tuned guitars alongside heavy rhythmic palm muting, where the guitarist physically dampens the vibrating strings with the side of their picking hand to create a tight percussive chug, Sabbath created a unique musical coding. This rhythmic, anti-blues approach is the true fingerprint of heavy metal that subsequent bands from Slayer to Pantera would strictly follow. The roots of the metal, Sister Rosetta Tharpe. Here's why this matters so much to our forensic investigation. If you trace Led Zeppelin's retained blues fingerprint backward, moving through bands like Cream and further back into the past, you inevitably hit foundational pioneers who set the stage for absolutely everything. You hit artists like the legendary Sister Rosetta Tharpe, whose roaring, distorted electric guitar playing in the 1940s and 50s proved vastly influential on a whole generation of budding British musicians. It completely highlights that the roots of heavy metal are deeply, inextricably linked to Black American music and the blues, even as later bands actively tried to transgress and mutate those very same origins. Theory 3. The scenesters, or prophets of subgenre hybridity. Finally, this third academic model uses post-subcultural theory to explain the modern landscape of music. It argues that genres don't just evolve in a neat straight line from one decade to the next, but rather through sudden, dramatic ruptures and complex hybridity. It closely examines how entirely new scenes break away from the musical past to create highly specific, avant-garde, and purist variations of a genre. Lena and Peterson's Agent-Sit model involves 4 steps: an avant-garde phase, a scene-based phase, an industry-based phase, and a traditionalist phase. This dynamic evolution is brilliantly captured here. They found that while traditional heavy metal organically went through all 4 of these stages over decades, its extreme offspring navigated the model very differently. Thrash metal, for example, moved from an avant-garde rebellion to an absolute industry powerhouse, but arguably never settled into becoming traditional. Death and black metal stayed fiercely protective, locking themselves in the avant-garde and scene-based phases, largely resisting any major industry takeover to maintain their extreme purity. Nu metal tells a completely different story. According to this model, nu metal skipped the underground scene completely. It emerged as an industry-based genre right from its inception, heavily engineered and promoted by major record labels rather than growing organically in the shadows.
Where will the next tracer bullet of music land? From the frantic, high-pressure 5-day recording sessions of Cream to the deep academic debates over Black Sabbath's blues transgressions, tracing music history is a wild, forensic ride. Genres are living, breathing ecosystems, born in the shadows long before we ever have the vocabulary to describe them. So take a look at today's underground scenes, the music being made in cramped garages and produced on bedroom laptops right now. Which unnamed genre is currently crystallizing in the dark, just waiting to be the next tracer bullet that changes the trajectory of music forever?